Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum and welcome to the Harborne Islamic Study Circle HISC Seerah session 189. Last week, alhamdulillah, we did a couple of minor incidents that happened after the Battle of Hunain and before the 9th year of Hijrah, before the Battle of Tabuk, inshallah, which will start next week. So we did a quick story on Qab ibn Zuhair, who was one of the most prominent poets of the Quraysh at the time, and then he ran away, and then he was written to say either leave Arabia for good or become a Muslim. And so despite his previously maligning Islam through his poetry and his propaganda, he sneaks into Medina unrecognized, meets the Prophet ﷺ and says, if Qab ibn Zuhair wanted to become a Muslim, what would you say to that? And the Prophet said, that's fine by me. And he goes, I am Qab. And then he recited a long poem that he'd composed honoring the Prophet ﷺ and his Islam. And the Prophet ﷺ was so impressed by the depth of the poetry and the sincerity of his words that he took off his own cloak, his burda, and he gave it to Qab. And again, and we've mentioned this before, that's sort of the highest accolade that a poet would receive in those societies. They didn't do it for the money. They didn't do it for some of the other reasons that we see propagandists do things now. If they were to get that type of recognition from the leader of the tribe or the head of state, that for them was a life fulfilled. Then we mentioned how the Prophet ﷺ performed his second in-person umrah of his prophethood on his way back to Medina after Hunain and Taif. And it's his sort of third rewarded umrah, because the first one was obviously Hudaybiyah when they couldn't go, so he made the intention and he got the reward for that. And the second one was the compensatory umrah in recompense for not doing Hudaybiyah the year they wanted to do it. And this is, as I said, the third one, or his second in-person umrah. And then we also mentioned how the Prophet ﷺ was dispatching out platoons and little bands of Muslims to demolish some of the temples that had idols in. And we talked about the story where Ali ibn Abi Talib was sent to demolish the one of the idols of the Ta'i tribe, and the head of that tribe was somebody called Adi ibn Hatim, and he was the son of a legendary philanthropist called Hatim al-Ta'i, who was known as the most generous amongst all the Arabs in his time. But Adi ibn Hatim, he flees when he hears the army is coming. His sister is captured as a prisoner of war. She then demands to see the Prophet ﷺ, saying, I am the daughter of Hatim. And the Prophet ﷺ says, fine, and releases her. Then she goes back, searches out her cowardly brother, who is sought refuge with one of the Christian kings. And she basically says, you got to man up, go to the Prophet ﷺ and either, curry favor with him. Either he's a king or a prophet. Either way, it's a win-win for you. And that's what Adi did. And the Prophet ﷺ confronted him directly and politely and said, look, become a Muslim. Why are you, on this misguided faith, and I know your religion better than you. And after that conversation and Adi seeing the way the Prophet ﷺ interacted with the people, he realized that the Prophet ﷺ was indeed a prophet, and then became a Muslim, and a strong Muslim at that, living to a ripe old age in the service of Islam. And then we talked about how he had this thing that was bugging him. Obviously, his father was known as a very generous person and did a lot of philanthropy, did a lot of hosting and looking after people, travelers, the poor, etc., and was renowned for his hospitality. So he Adi ibn Hatim comes to the Prophet and says, look, Ya Rasulullah, my father used to be good with relatives and he was generous with the people and he used to do this and that. Will he be rewarded for the good that he did, essentially? And the Prophet replied with, as I say, with a really important quote that we can learn a lot from. And the Prophet said, look, your father desired something and he got what he desired. And so, that was a mic drop moment. And that's something that we can all take things from in terms of the intentions behind our action. So, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Qur'an in translation that whoever wants the akhirah, the hereafter, and strives for it whilst he is a believer, that is the one, his reward will be given to him. So we do things for the right intention, for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If we do things for fame, if we do things for popularity, if we do things for money, then that is your objective, your goal, and Allah will quite possibly allow you to achieve that goal in this life, but then don't expect that to count significantly on the scales on the Day of Judgment, because you're doing it for things other than the pleasure of Allah. So now we're in the transition period between the 8th year Hijri and the 9th year of Hijri, and some of these stories encompass that sort of period of time. It's not chronologically accurate in terms of where we are in the Seerah, as in where the process goes back after Hunayn. So a lot of the books of Seerah, they clump together a lot of these little mini stories into these sections, and for example, there's a lot of these missions and platoons that were sent out, and I'll just read a list of these. But it's important to recognize that this is still part of a strategy that Prophet ﷺ was doing in terms of consolidating Islam, propagating Islam, and it's a means of dawah, enforcing the rules of Islam, and the collecting the Jizya or the zakat or demolishing the idols is part of the foreign policy as well as the internal mechanisms of the state now. So the Prophet, he's demonstrating how an Islamic state should function and what are the priorities. And part of these things, as I say, he sent out quite a lot of platoons, which we're not going to go into detail. We might mention a couple if we get time. So there was Uyaina bin Hisn, who was sent to Bani Tamim. We might cover that later. Yazid bin Hussein was sent to the tribes of Aslam and Khifar. Abad bin Bishr was sent to Sulaim and to Muzayna. And Rafi bin Muqayth, he was sent to Juhayna. And some of these tribes we've mentioned before, so they are important tribes. Amr bin al-As, we talked about Amr bin al-As before, he was sent to Bani Faraza. And Dahak bin Sufyan was sent to Bani Kalb. We might cover that later on, inshallah. Bashir bin Sufyan was sent to Bani Kab. Ibn al-Lutaybiyah was sent to Bani Dubyan. Who was this? Al-Muhajir bin Abi Umayyah was sent to Sana'a. And Ziyad bin Labid was sent to Hadramut. So again, you can see these are the furthest expanses of the Arabian Peninsula. Sana'a, Hadramut. There was Adi bin Hatim, who we've just talked about. He was sent to Ta'i, where he's from. And then from there, he was sent to Bani Asad. Malik bin Nuwaira, he was sent to Bani Hanzala. We've talked about them before in one of the stories. Zabraqan bin Badr was sent to Bani Sa'd, or part of Bani Sa'd anyway. Qais bin Asim was also sent to another part of Bani Sa'd. And Al-Ala bin Hadrami was sent to Bahrain. Ali bin Abi Talib was sent to Najran to collect zakat and jizya. So you can just get a sense that, this is the mechanism of state. These things are going on. Some of these were dispatched in the 7th year Hijri, but a lot of these in the 8th year Hijri, and then shortly after the conquest of Mecca. But we see as part of that strategy, a lot of these other tribes and cities having to reconcile that they have to become Muslim now. The Prophet, he's also testing out the Sahabi, those that have leadership qualities, those that have some military training, and sending them out on these platoons to see how they function, teach them how to deal with these small groups, and then later on, those skills that they learn, they will then be able to deploy them when they become governors or when they become other generals and when they're pushing out Islam. So it's a question of training the next generation to take forward the call. So these things are really important, and a leader needs to consider all of these things, and it's about upskilling the people that demonstrate leadership qualities and identifying those, and then sort of honing those skills and qualities. And so they may do some apprenticeship type stuff, see how other people are doing things, and then they get the opportunity to do things themselves. And again, he's also choosing some of these leaders to collect zakah. Others he's teaching to become teachers of these other newly converted tribes. So some of these leaders, they would be sent as governors over these particular areas, and then some of them would be principally sent as qurra or teachers of Islam, teachers of Qur'an and Sunnah, and other times he would dispatch collectors of zakah to collect the zakah and the jizya that the non-Muslims pay. And sometimes you can have the one person doing multiple roles, and again, it's what we lose sight of today because we don't have an Islamic State is that the function of collecting zakah, it's a religious function, and there can only be delegated people authorized by the state to collect the zakah. And so there's only two ways in classical Islam, there's only two ways of giving your zakah. You have to either give it to the designated tax collector, and that tax collector is the one that is appointed by the head of state, or you personally give it to any one of those people who fit the 8 categories of zakah that are mentioned in the Qur'an. And you're not allowed, in classical Islam, to give it to any middleman, whether they set themselves up as a tax collecting entity or a charity or something else. It's seen as usurping the role of the state if it goes through a middleman. It has to go through the designated tax collector, or you give it yourself personally. So again, there are lessons there for us, but what we can see is the Islamic State is being organized, the bureaucracy is being created, and the machinery of the state is becoming established and politicized. So a few other things to talk about, inshallah, today. And so I think sometimes we lose sight of that when we go through the Seerah and we interact with some of these stories or these hadith. We don't fully appreciate these other aspects of how the Prophet ﷺ was orchestrating society on a day day basis with the structures that are all there. So a couple of things from the family of the Prophet, from his personal life, just to mention. Like I say, some of these things happened, within this year or two, and one of them is, first one to mention is his marriage to a marriage that basically didn't last long, or that he divorced. And there's, in the books of Seerah, there are different names for this person. So there's Fatima bint al-Dahak. There's also, somebody said the name of the lady was Ibn al-Jawm, from the tribe of al-Jawm, or some say her name was Umayma bint Numan, and others say it's Asma bint Kab al-Jawniya, again from the tribe of Jawn. So it's as I say, it's in the books of Seerah, almost as a postscript, and it's in the books of Hadith, where the Prophet, he proposed to a lady, going by one of those names, whether it's Fatima, Ibn al-Jawm, Umayma, or Asma. He proposed to one of those ladies, and she was from one of the local, one of the nearby tribes, but she was an aristocrat, it said. And then they had the marriage ceremony, and later on in the evening, on the night of the marriage, the Prophet ﷺ, he entered into the room where she was, and then for some reason, which we don't know, she replies, "I seek Allah's refuge from you." So as the Prophet ﷺ, they got married, he's entering into her room, she says, "I seek Allah's refuge from you." So the Prophet ﷺ, he just instantly stopped, obviously. He recognized when no means no. And he goes, "Well, you have sought refuge in the one who is very great, so go back to your family." And so he divorced her there. So the marriage was not consummated. They had no intimate relations. And the Prophet said, basically, "I divorce you," without saying it in those words, "You are divorced," talaq. He basically said, "Go back to your family." And that's essentially all we know about this. There are the scholars of Seerah have postulated some of the reasons why this could be. Some say this was a plot of some of her jealous relatives. They said, almost as a joke, when you see him, it's tradition to say this, but obviously the Prophet, when she said, "I seek refuge from you," then I seek Allah's refuge from you, then the Prophet took it on face value and said, "Fine, back you go." Some give her an excuse that she was mentally unwell, but whatever the real reason, it's not documented. It's obvious that Allah didn't want this particular lady to become one of the mother of the believers. So, and other books of historical books say that she obviously regretted that incident later on. And the scholars have said you can indirectly divorce somebody, because the Prophet did this. He didn't say directly, "I divorce you, I divorce you, I divorce you." So this type of technical divorce, and which is done before consummation, it's obviously allowed, and it has the term ginaya in Sharia. So that's a little story, and again, we still today live in a society where there's a stigma attached to divorce and being divorced. And sometimes people think that divorce in of itself is bad and evil, but it is something that the Sharia has permitted. And when people do divorce, it doesn't mean there's necessarily been, sometimes there is, but it doesn't necessarily mean that there has been evil that's happened. Sometimes it's just people are not compatible. And we've seen this in the life of the Prophet ﷺ, when Zayd bin Haritha, the Prophet's previously adopted son, and Zaynab bint Jahsh, they were married by recommendation of the Prophet, but they didn't get along, they didn't gel, and then they divorced, and they moved on, and there's nothing wrong with that. So there shouldn't be necessarily the stigma that our communities throughout the Muslim world attach to being divorced. And again, we fail to appreciate that the majority of the wives of the Prophet ﷺ were in fact divorcees. So, and the only one that was unmarried was Aisha, I think, beforehand. So the majority of the Prophet's wives were divorcees. Some were widows. And that's not the only divorce the Prophet ﷺ had that we talked about. It's also said the Prophet ﷺ, well, it's recorded the Prophet ﷺ divorced Hafsa bint Umar. So the daughter of Umar, Hafsa, the Prophet ﷺ also divorced her. And then while she was in her iddah period, Jibreel alayhi salam came down to the Prophet ﷺ and said, take her back. So the command came from Allah. So whatever happened between Hafsa and Prophet ﷺ, actually we don't know, but Jibreel intervened and said, you need to take her back. So the Prophet ﷺ took Hafsa back. So again, this is it's these things happen, and we just need to be more mature in how we deal with those issues. The other thing to mention that happened around about now is the death of one of the daughters of the Prophet ﷺ, and that is Zaynab bint Muhammad. Now, we already mentioned that one of his daughters has previously died and has been buried. So this is so Zaynab was the eldest of the children of the Prophet ﷺ, but she was the second one to die. So it said that she was born about 10 years before prophethood. So we're nearly 20 years, we're over 20 years into prophethood. So this makes her about 31, 32 perhaps. Zaynab, we'll talk about the death of Zaynab first, but we'll just do a quick recap on the death of Ruqayyah, who's the first daughter of the Prophet to pass away. Ruqayyah, she was married to the son of Abu Lahab, but the marriage was never consummated, so they had essentially like a type of engagement. So the daughter of the Prophet Ruqayyah, she was married to the daughter of Abu Lahab, but then when prophethood started, Abu Lahab ordered his son to divorce her, and then so she was divorced, and then Uthman ibn Affan married Ruqayyah, and then they were amongst the first group of Muslims that migrated to Abyssinia, in the first migration to Abyssinia, and then they were amongst the first group that came back from Abyssinia when the rumor happened that the Quraysh had become Muslim. And then they stayed there, obviously, and Uthman then did hijrah to Medina. Ruqayyah followed later on, but it said that she fell ill during just around about the time of the Battle of Badr. So when the Prophet ﷺ, he made the announcement that they're going to intercept the caravan of Abu Sufyan, the Prophet Uthman got ready, but the Prophet ﷺ told Uthman that you need to stay back and look after his daughter Ruqayyah, Uthman's wife. So Uthman stayed back, cared for Ruqayyah, and he then got a share of the spoils of Badr, because his intention was to go, but he was told to stay back, and he essentially gets the reward of being a Badriyun. And then she died whilst during that time, and it said that the day that Zayd bin Haritha returned to Medina with the news of the battle of the victory of the Battle of Badr, and we said how they were chanting so and so's died and so and so's died and so and so's died, and the munafiqeen were just mocking him. On that day, the Prophet returned after battle, and that's when he found out that his daughter had passed away. And then on what was meant to be the happiest day, when they defeated Badr, the Quraysh at Badr, he went to the grave of his daughter. So that was Ruqayyah, who was the first one to pass away. Now, Zaynab bint Muhammad, she married her maternal cousin, and his name was, and we talked about it before, Abu al-As al-Rabi'. Now, during as part of the wedding, Zaynab bint Muhammad, she was given an onyx necklace by Khadija as a wedding gift. And it said that Zaynab, she became a Muslim soon after the Prophet ﷺ publicly declared that he's or after he declared that he is a prophet. So she was one of the first to become Muslim. The Quraysh put a lot of pressure on Abu al-As to divorce Zaynab, but he refused to divorce Zaynab. So they stayed together in Mecca during all that time. And then Abu al-As was one of those people that was captured in the Battle of Badr. And it said that during the Battle of Badr, although he went along, he didn't actually fight. And there were quite a few people there who refused to fight. They were just there because they were noble people. They had to be seen to be there. So he was captured. And then the money for his ransom was sent back to the family, and then as part of that, Zaynab sent the money for his ransom as a prisoner of war, and included in that money was the onyx necklace that Khadija had given to Zaynab. And when the Prophet saw the necklace, he felt very emotional. He then refused the ransom, and then said to Abu al-As that go back. Your ransom will be that you go back and then you send my daughter back to me. So Abu al-As went home to Mecca and was true to his promise, arranged for Zaynab to go back to Medina. But then, if you can remember, we talked about how they were getting Zaynab ready to come back to come to Medina. And Zaynab's adopted brother Zayd arrived in Mecca to escort her to Medina. And so she sort of done all her packing. She sat in her howdaj, which is the sort of the enclosed covering that you put on top of a camel or an elephant or your transport like that that's got curtains around it. And so she's on a howdaj, and her brother-in-law Kinana, he's leading the camel out of Mecca in broad daylight. And he didn't think there was anything wrong. Then the Quraysh, they saw this as having their noses rubbed in humiliation after the Battle of Badr. So they pursue Zaynab and the camel, and they cut them off at a place called Dutwa. And then there's an arrogant man known as Habar bin al-Aswad who took out his spear, and he was really aggressive. and it said that he pierced the camel. The camel obviously jolted, and then Zaynab fell out of the howdage, and she fell onto a rock. And we talked about this before. And then because of that, she suffered a miscarriage and internal bleeding. And then when that happened, Kinana, he got his arrows out and he said, if anyone comes near me, I'm going to kill them. And then they dispatched for the leaders of the Quraysh. Then Abu Sufyan came, and he then tried to mediate, and he told Kinana, put your bow and arrow away. Let's talk about this rationally. You know, basically, what's wrong with you? Why are you trying to rub our noses into it? And, you know, I have no desire to keep Zaynab from her father, but you got to do it in a less subtle way, or a more subtle way, a less, you know, overt way. You know, it's wrong to humiliate as Quraysh in public like this. Let things die down, then just take her out one night. And so he, being Abu Sufyan, he carried the clout and arranged for that to happen. But it said, and then, you know, Kinana then took Zaynab back to Medina. But as I say, she'd lost a lot of blood, she'd had a miscarriage, and she had basically those internal injuries, it said, were the cause of her early demise. And she's only in her early 30s. And as sort of a side note, the chap Habar ibn al-Aswad, who's the one who pierced the camel, his descendants became some rulers of some small dynasty in the Indian subcontinent known as the Habari dynasty. But that's just sort of a side note. But then Zaynab, she goes back to Medina. Obviously, she suffers this sort of chronic illness following the fall. And then we talked about how Abu al-As came, you know, years later to Medina, and it said that his caravan was raided. He essentially escaped, but then he came to Medina and sought refuge with Zaynab, and then Zaynab, she took him in because they're still technically married, and then in the morning after Fajr, she turns around and says, and then after Fajr, she makes a public announcement, Zaynab, to everyone in the mosque behind the curtain, that I have given protection to Abu al-As ibn al-Rabi. And then the Prophet ﷺ, he's astounded by that. People are asking him what's happening, and the Prophet ﷺ said, look, you know, by Allah, I did not know about this. I don't, you know, this is news to me. And then he goes, we protect whoever she protects. And then Abu al-As, he returned the goods that were entrusted to him in the caravan to the Quraysh, and he becomes a Muslim, and they resume their married life. And as I said, she now dies in this period, towards the end of the 8th year of Hijri into the 9th year, as a consequence of the internal bleeding, the miscarriage that happened to her previously. The other sort of story from the Prophet ﷺ's, and just to mention, the Prophet ﷺ, he buried in his life 3 of his 4 daughters. Ruqayyah we talked about, Zaynab, who's just passed away now, and then later Kulthum, she dies as well. And after the Prophet ﷺ dies, within 6 months, his other daughter Fatima, bint Muhammad, she dies as well. So then the other thing that happened in around this time is that the Prophet ﷺ's son Ibrahim was born. Obviously, he passes away a bit later on, but he's sort of born here in this time. And then just to sort of finish off the last 5 minutes, as I said, we'll just talk about some of the other little platoons that were sent. So, where they're destroying some of these idols. Tufayl ibn Amr, he was sent to the Yemen, to a tribe where they worshipped an idol called Dhul Qafain, and that belonged to the tribe of Ad-Daws. The tribe of Ad-Daws is the tribe of Abu Huraira. He's known as Abu Huraira al-Dawsi. And so Tufayl ibn Amr, he's sent there, and I'm not sure if we've mentioned this before, but they were an arrogant tribe, and they built what they claimed was their own kaaba. So they wanted to, build their own temple, which they called a kaaba, and they wanted in the southern part of the Arabian Peninsula for them to be sort of seen as a place of pilgrimage, and to try and take some of the religious, accolades for that. So they're setting themselves up as a rival Kaaba, and so the Prophet ﷺ, he sent Tufayl ibn Amr, but Tufayl he mentioned to the Prophet ﷺ, he said that actually, that whenever Ya Rasulullah, whenever I sit on a horse, I've got this problem. I always seem to fall off. I just can't stay on a horse. Yet you're sending me on this mission. So the Prophet he put his hands up and made a dua for him. Ya Allah, make him firm. And then Tufayl says, after that, I never fell off my horse ever again. So they went down to the Yemen, they saw this sort of temple that they claimed was the Kaaba, and they burned it down. And that's the temple that had their idol Dhul Qafain in it. Also, in the same sort of area in the Yemen, the Prophet sent Jabir bin Abdullah to Dhul Qalasa, and they had a big temple and idol, and the Prophet, it said, was irritated by this particular tribe, and the Prophet said, will you not get rid of Dhul Qalasa for me? Saying, look, how comes there are still people worshipping idols on the Arabian Peninsula, and he didn't want this open show of idolatry in Arabia, and he sort of cleared out the public idolatry from the center of the peninsula, and he's now just wiping out from the further reaches. There are still polytheists. There's still pagans. There are still idol worshippers in Arabia. Prophet is not forcing people to become Muslim. There's no inquisition. He's just getting rid of these public temples and idols, and people can still go about their own sort of personal idolatry, if they like. And Allah refers to that, and we'll do this inshallah next week as sort of one of the things around the Battle of Tabuk, where the Quraysh are given, or the people of Mecca and the Arabian Peninsula are given notice, where Allah says that from now on there will be no more idolatry, certainly not in Mecca, and so and those people that have had treaties with the Muslims, if they've stayed with the treaty, that's fine. Other than that, there's the rules of the game have changed. But this is the period of time where the Prophet he's getting rid of all of these big temples with idols, and this approach is then consolidated in Surah Al-Tawbah, which is related to the Battle of Tabuk, and again they contain the final verses on fighting and on jihad and on these issues. And again, the scholars, they argue about whether these are updated verses or these are abrogating verses in terms of how they should be interpreted. But inshallah, we'll talk about those later on. A couple of other quick things to mention just for completeness. We mentioned Uyaina bin Hisn al-Fazari. He was sent with a platoon in Muharram of the 9th year of Hijrah to Bani Tamim with 50 horsemen, and they were victorious there. A platoon led by Qutbah ibn Amr. The way they went to a place in Taballa, and that's in Safar of the 9th year, and they had 20 men, 10 camels, and they had to alternate, and there was a lot of fighting there. Some of them were killed, but the Muslims were successful, and they defeated the enemy and came back with a lot of camels, women, and sheep to Medina. We talked briefly about Dahak bin Sufyan al-Kilabi, sent to Bani Tamim, and that's in Rabi Awal, the 9th year. And his mission to Bani Kilab was to ask them to become Muslims. They refused, and there was some fighting, but in the end, Bani Kilab, they were defeated. And obviously the Haki was from Bani Kilab, and it's called Al-Kilabi. There was 300 men that were sent under the leadership of Alqama bin Mujazziz, and he was sent to the shores of Arabia near Jeddah, and that was because he was sent to fight some of the Abyssinian pirates because they were doing a lot of piracy and intercepting the goods and the caravans along the coast. So he was sent to get rid of these guys from Abyssinia. But when they found out that Alqama is coming, they basically fled, and they weren't a problem after that. And then finally, an expedition to Bani Tamim, because they were refusing to pay Jizya, and they were telling the other tribes around there, Bani Tamim, not to pay Jizya. And Jizya, Jizya is the tribute that the non-Muslim citizens under the Islamic State have to pay. So as Muslims, we have to pay zakah and lots of other taxes, but the non-Muslims who are living under an Islamic State don't have to become Muslims, but they have to pay something called jizya. And there's verses in the Qur'an that refer to this. But Bani Tamim, they were refusing to pay jizya, and they were telling other people not to pay it. So Uyaina bin Hisn was sent, and it said that, that they, as sometimes that these armies did, that they would march at night, and then they would sort of rest in the daytime because they didn't want the army to be seen. And so basically that's how they traveled, and they caught them by surprise. And it said that 11 men, 21 women, and 30 boys were captured, and then they were taken back to Medina, and they were housed in sort of a large safe house, quasi sort of a prison type area, housed in Ramla bint al-Harith's house, because he had a big house. Then 10 of their leaders from this sub-tribe of Bani Tamim, they came to the Prophet's door, and they knocked on it and said, "Oh Muhammad, come out and face us." And then they sort of had an audience with the Prophet, and they're exchanging words with each other. And then it said that the Prophet then left them to pray Dhuhr, went to play dhuhr. After that, he sat in the sort of area, the patio area outside the Masjid al-Nabawi, and then this tribe, they started boasting about how wonderful they are, and how their sort of how superior their tribal heritage is. And so they got one of their main orators, their main poets, and wordsmiths, called Utalib bin Hajib, to deliver some prose and oratory. So that's what Utalib did. And so the Prophet ﷺ, he then asked Thabit bin Qais to stand up as the delegated Muslim orator and respond. So Utalib said something, from the tribe, and the Prophet ﷺ turns to Thabit and said, "You say something now." So Thabit stood up and he said something. So then in return, the other tribe, they brought one of their famous poets called Al-Zabraqan bin Badr, and so he recited some beautiful poetry. So the Prophet ﷺ then turned to his official poet, Hassan bin Thabit, and said, "Reply back." So Hassan then replied back, and then at the end it said that Al-Arqa bin Habith said, "Their orator is more eloquent than ours, their poet is more poetic and learned than ours, their voices and sayings excel ours as well." So they conceded defeat, and because of that toing and froing, they then all embraced Islam. And then due to that, the Prophet ﷺ recognized their Islam, obviously, and gave them back their women and their children, and they were allowed to return back. So that's the end of these stories, inshallah. So from next week, we'll spend a few weeks talking about the Battle of Tabuk. And obviously one of the really famous stories in the Battle of Tabuk is the story of Ka'b bin Malik and the dangers of procrastination. I wanted to do that today, but inshallah we'll do it next time. But it's a really important story, especially with exams coming up and Ramadan coming up. It's it's something important that we don't keep delaying things and putting things off, inshallah. So we'll talk about that next time. So in the meantime, do remember it in your du'as. Do remember the ummah in your du'as. Stay safe, hands, face, space, fresh air, inshallah. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. وَلَسَرْ إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ لَفِي خُسْرٍ إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالْحَقِّ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالصَّبْرِ. جزاك الله خير. السلام عليكم.